Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, my old friend, John Thompson. So John is the co-founder of Circling Europe. And if you don't know what circling is, you're a square, and we'll tell you soon. He's also used to run an integral tennis academy. So that was an interesting venture. He's a long-term integral practitioner. For those of you who have heard episodes with Ken Wilbur and people like that may be familiar, but we'll cover it if not. So John, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Where are you in the world today?
I'm at my home in Amsterdam, which is, I don't get to be here that much, so it's nice.
But John, you don't sound Dutch. What is this? You are not from Amsterdam? Okay, let's now have offended exactly 10% of our listeners. How did you get into the body? What was your beginning interest in the body?
It was actually from playing tennis. It used to fascinate me and drive me mad, like how different I could perform at different situations. So that got me into psychology from quite an early age, and I just kind of never stopped. And then I got into coaching it, and the more I could learn about that, the better, really.
So, I mean, there is this thing that you discover when you do a sport, which has this very it confronts you with reality, which is like, oh my God, I'm completely different on different days. What the fuck is going on? Like it's quite a kind of shocking, right? Because you think of a computer game, if there's a character that has strength 10 and agility 8 and speed 11, they're like that the whole time on a computer game. But real life doesn't work that way, does it?
Right. And it was pretty confronting for me because I would freeze up at times on the court, and I would feel like when it most mattered, I wouldn't play as well, and so I had a lot of shame around that, and I beat myself up a lot around that. So it was definitely confronting, and there was a nakedness to playing that sport, but also fascination, especially as I started coaching people and seeing how I could make a difference for them, and to see how so many different things are interconnected that go in to see what happens when someone performs. And realizing that as a coach, we can intervene and we can do work on ourselves that can have a significant impact.
So you were playing tennis at a high level, and then you're coaching young people in this academy.
Yeah, and I worked with players of all ages, but with the Integral Tennis Academy, it was focused on juniors. But we actually did. This was the thing is, I had success working with juniors on their psychology and on like performing well when it matters and training hell and being resilient. But I soon saw that the influence that the parents had over the child's psychology was so huge, especially for the younger children. So very early on, I started working more with the parents.
Okay.
Because a small shift in the parent, it was then like all the hours and hours and hours that the child would have with the parent, it really shifts something.
Right.
And that was actually the coolest part of the academy, was that we did integral coaching with the adults of the athletes, with the parents of the athletes, on how they could better support their children. And we got some real breakthroughs with that. And we also inspired these people who had never even heard of life coaching or business coaching or integral coaching into that. And they got into it and they developed themselves, not just for their children, but they soon learned how all these things were interconnected, how they show up with their child is connected to how they show up in work. And so that was a cool element of it for me, getting to share my passion for integral coaching and do it with people who had, didn't know anything about it. And then see the results for the kids on the court, and because we were focused on excellence as well. It wasn't just for like developing people and having the whole system work better. It was about, this can help people perform better and produce better athletes.
Yeah, sports has that results focus, doesn't it? It's not just let's feel good or do some personal growth for some abstract means. And I knew a dog trainer who said he was really an owner trainer, not a dog trainer. So it makes sense to me, working with the parents, and then, they've got this disproportionate influence on the children. maybe we should define a few terms here. So, maybe listeners have heard the episodes with Benzer or Keith Martin Smith or Ken Wilber, but maybe they haven't. So how would you define integral coaching, whether it be life coaching, tennis coaching, or anything else?
It's a coaching methodology, Integral Coaching Canada, that bases their whole coaching method on Ken Wilber's integral philosophy. And it's a particularly rigorous method that it's a long time since I trained in it, but I got a lot from it at the time, especially. And it's a thorough way of working with people, basically in the same way that integral theory is incredibly rigorous and thorough.
So integral theory is associated with Ken Wilber, for those that haven't heard of him, and there's still quite a lot who haven't, I find. And basically it's a theory of everything. So integral is looking at completeness. So what does, let's start with the tennis kids then, or tennis adults. How does that show up in that context?
Mainly it was following this methodology that I trusted deeply, a coaching methodology that would help work from people where they are to get them to where they want to be. And in the process, they could develop all kinds of new capacities from an integral language in all 4 quadrants. So it's just, again, this a thoroughness and a depth of understanding about what it is to grow and develop, and a lot of background support to help people get on that path. Because a lot of these parents of athletes, they're not really aware of the possibilities of adult development. And that's something that's one of the primary exciting things about integral theory for people very new to it, is that, like, wow, look what changes as adults we can go through. In the same way that we grow as kids and go through all these stages of development, they just keep going as we go into adulthood if we engage.
Mm-hmm. And actually, we've had a few guests on that spoke about levels of development, like Benzer, and there's one with Roger Walsh from the conference, and Ken always talks about levels of development. It's a critical concept. And what we actually haven't discussed in any episodes here is the quadrants, which is the other sort of super key part of an integral model, right? Like tennis players may just be looking at the body part, and what is that, upper right? And there's this idea of in the external physical, like diet and exercise and training, but then there's obviously a lot more to it than that, because there's these other quadrants, as Ken calls them.
Right. Yeah, and as Ken points out, there's often a right quadrant bias to the more material, visible aspects of reality, and a lot of the work we were doing was showing up more the interior side, like the upper left, of like what's actually going on in these children, like how do they feel about their sport, how do they feel when they're under pressure, what are they wanting to get from the sport. And then also the lower left, which is more the community, so looking at what other effects are on the children, and obviously the parent is a big one, and also the peers is a big one, but that's where there weren't many interventions. And that's why the government, like the LTA, was really excited in the end, and other sports organizations, about what we came up with, because they knew that parents were kind of a problem in some way, or from their point of view, they got in the way. But we had put together a kind of learning curriculum and then this coaching methodology to empower the parents and include the parents in a way that could take them on the journey as well. Because at the end of the day, they were paying the bill, and they wanted to get, I saw parents suffering so much on the sidelines through lack of understanding of really what was going on the court. And the parent actually getting a better understanding of what was going on and seeing how they could better support their child, like in quite a major way, because so much pressure would be coming from the parents without them even realizing that they were doing it. So the interventions there were quite magical, some of them. Like I saw children go on like crying and under pressure to like joyful, because they realized their parents were on board with their goals and that the parents were happy with them if they were following their goals.
Yeah. So as you say, that piece around psychology, but also the culture they're in, the family system, the friend systems, how those things link up, is huge. I mean, I have a personal story. I actually quit playing tennis because of how my dad was when he would watch the games.
Right.
It was just that he had a sort of emotional temper and would sometimes shout at umpires or opposition. I just went, fuck this, it's not worth it. And, you know, I need to play a sport that my dad takes less of an interest in. And it was, you know, for me, that was a major factor in stopping playing.
Right.
You literally haven't thought about it in the years. You're bringing back my trauma, John, already. And I haven't thought about that in years. And it's like, okay, so that's why I quit that particular sport. But that's not a small thing, like my emotional state, his emotional state, you know, the culture of competition and winning that existed in our family. And like culture really is in business. They always say like culture trumps systems. And culture is, you know, massively important, isn't it, in terms of the interiors and the emotionalities of not only individuals but also groups.
Right. Exactly. And in a way that links on to circling a little bit, because it was when I found that practice, which you could say is quite heavily focused on that we between people and what's happening internally, but what's happening with us together. I found it such a potent methodology for self-understanding, but for like improving the connection with people and deepening the connections with people.
Before we go into circling, that is going to be a big topic, obviously, if we have time. Just I want to kind of complete on the quadrants front, because I think this is a super interesting thing for listeners, like to look at any challenge through the lens of collective, singular, interior, exterior.
Yeah.
Like, so there's the body part and then the felt internal part, psychology, including embodied, and then the structures and systems, which I think is often underdone, and the culture. So it's like, you know, I was talking about ethics with Shinzen Young and Paul Linden yesterday. And it's interesting, you could look at like ethics of teachers, which is often discussed in psychological terms. You can actually look at that through the lens of like structures and systems, like what do they have feedback mechanisms? Is there accountability? Is there a culture in an organization that comes from Asia and maybe you can't question a teacher? Like in many ways, I think like this, in this hot issue of ethics, people put it down to, there's bad teachers and we have to stop teachers being, you know, nasty people becoming teachers. But actually it's the position itself.
Right.
And the lack of structures and systems around it that could lead to unethical behavior as much as the actual individual.
And also the cultural understanding around it, because, you know, guru culture in India, there's a very strong cultural understanding. Everyone has a guru. That's just normal. Whereas in the West, that isn't normal. And we've got a different understanding and expectations of what people in power. I mean, that's the cultural situation that I want to actually shed light on when we say someone's in a power position.
Yeah.
Because I see the importance of that and the wisdom in that, but I also see how that can stop us seeing the deeper dynamics of what could be going on, because we have a responsibility as participants in how we show up with the people who we perceive to be in power.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure how much you want to get into some of the things that have publicly, you know, happened with you, and I'm totally okay if we just move on. But it's one we've talked about privately, and I don't want to, you know, bring out that into a public forum without your real permission here. But I think there's certainly some interesting topics and some other points of view other than the mainstream one, which is currently dominating. Yeah,
I'm happy to talk about that. I find it fascinating, and I brought up that as an example, really.
So this idea of sort of teachers have all the power and therefore they're, you know, nasty, abusing teachers. Normally it's aimed at men, though I predict this is going to move to female teachers soon. Yeah, and there seems to be a kind of saying, okay, the emphasis is all on them and whether they're nasty or not.
Right, and this is where a stage of development model I see is quite useful, because it's a development to have systems in place where we can really challenge people in power and have awesome systems of accountability. That is a development. That's a liberation that can happen. So I want to celebrate that. And it doesn't stop there. And I know for me personally, I don't want that to be the dominant way of thinking. If I go to a workshop and I've chosen to go there, I don't consider that workshop leader necessarily has a power over me. I have I would see that as actually disempowering of me. My power is in my choice to go there, my willingness to risk putting trust in that person, my ability to show up in my authenticity the whole time during that workshop. So that side of things feels important as well. It's so that people don't overemphasize a victim position.
Yeah, I think it's interesting looking at some of the current narrative through a victim, this victim triangle perspective, which could be, okay, so there's a victim, there's a persecutor, and a rescuer. For those that don't know this model, it's a fairly common model in therapy. There's variations thereof. And it seems like, most of the people we have on are teachers and could easily, in the current climate, fall into the model of the persecutor of some kind. And then the victim is kind of like, anyone who makes a complaint by definition. And the rescuer is the brave social justice warrior who outs the evil persecutor online, or some kind of public shaming normally. There's a particular sort of pattern of violence. And that person, as soon as any accusation happens, they must be in the wrong. And the person's projected perhaps their own sort of psychological inner bully or inner tyrant or whatever onto that person. And any kind of dialogue at that point is very tricky. And stepping out of that is very tricky. Recently someone was not a student, but a colleague had a sense of me. It was the sense of them being in the victim position, put me in the persecutor. And then anything I did sort of seemed in that light, as it were.
Right. Yeah,
and it's very tricky to get out of those frames once they're established, isn't it?
Absolutely. And from my point of view, leading in my current role for 5 or 6 years, I've always known that big challenges come as when you step into a leadership role, and I've been up for that. And suddenly within this last year, there's just been a new level of challenge come on board. And at times I've just been like, wow, I'm like, it's quite easy to be dehumanized by people. Like when things are taken to an extreme, I feel like, wow, this is quite an unsafe place to be because there isn't much space for my humanity. And that's a lose-lose. I don't just mean for myself and my own issues with that. I think everyone loses out when that happens.
And it's interesting because this is the side of things which isn't often heard, because Jonathan Haidt says there's a religion of the victim currently. The sacred victim is what he calls it, which means that particular position has suddenly been given a disproportionate amount of weighting in a new way. And so anything that could possibly be perceived as excusing a perpetrator of any, even just an accused one, or potentially perceived as blaming a victim, that's like the ultimate sin in this new religion. And it's almost like people are clamoring for victim status of some kind. And it's interesting. It's someone like yourself who I regard as, basically a good guy and likable. And I, certainly haven't heard any reports of anything atrocious. You're no Harvey Weinstein, that's for sure. And it's disturbing to me. And also, if I'm honest, John, just like, person to person, worrying. Because I've felt a sense of vulnerability to a potentially very unfair attack for the last sort of only really 6 months. And I felt this for the first time in my career. It's, I think, getting to a certain stage, like we have a certain leadership position, but B, the world culture, even in the last 6 months to 1 year, seems to have really shifted. And that I think, and as you say, there's a real vulnerability there, is how I experience it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I resonate with that. And it's how to hold like a celebration of the cultural unfolding of what does feel like more pluralistic values coming into the mainstream, which is a progression and and then also like, yeah, this is where the line is now, like, or maybe not this is where the line is, but like, hey, look at the impact on me here in service of everyone.
And I've really seen some very cruel responses to any kind of fair complaint, or like, fuck you, you don't matter.
Yeah,
really like a dehumanizing unpleasantness. It's like, wow, we're not talking about someone who's done horrible things, and that's not established in any way. I even saw someone post yesterday, we used to have innocent until proven guilty, but we found that didn't work. And like it was almost like a past thing for them as a concept. So I think it's pretty interesting times to be in a leadership role.
It is, and I've had not sleepless nights, but I've woken up many a times at 5 a.m, nervous system going into survival mode, thinking like, what the fuck, and kind of questioning myself, like, have I done something wrong? And what I take from it now is like, my heart beats most when I actually worry if I've been out of integrity in some way. And I can see the gift that it's giving me in looking under every nook and cranny, like every nook and cranny, and then getting more like professional and taking due diligence to another level, like just cleaning up everything.
Let's acknowledge that there's a real positive, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's a real positive as a leader, because it's like, I'm basically an ethical, integrous guy. And, there's always grey areas. There's always times when I'm kind of wobbling in my integrity. And there's an extra motivation because of the threat that exists. And there's a pointing back towards, like, I don't want to operate out of fear of getting caught doing something. I want to be pointed back to my own integrity and going, you know what? This is a little off. Or you know what? Actually, I need to take this issue more seriously than I might previously have done. And I think that's what the kind of, good-hearted, emotionally intelligent leaders are doing. And it can, I'm trying not to just resent it. I'm trying to go, you know what, there's something really positive in this, rather than being fear-driven or, if anyone's listening, we're certainly not making the claim, you can't get away with things you used to. That's not the complaint here. And I think, again, it's dehumanizing when people convert any kind of discussion around this into that complaint.
Yeah.
And this is very much a peer-to-peer conversation now rather than just an interview, so I hope you don't mind.
No, I was looking forward to that element of this.
It feels live, right? It feels relevant.
Exactly.
And as you say, there's also the gift of it, which is like, you know what? Maybe that thing I did 5 years ago as a more junior teacher, it didn't officially break the rules, but feeling back into it, maybe not now,
Right. And then the other side of it is a realization. It has made me kind of buy into a lot of it. Ken Wilber's thinking even more, because a lot of his predictions about culture really seems to be playing out now.
Yes.
And it is vulnerable to be held to account to certain worldviews that from their point of view aren't up for question. Whereas from my point of view, like, I feel I understand their worldview, but I don't feel that they understand where I'm coming from. And there isn't necessarily room for that dialogue. And just the realization that can happen quite consistently then does two things. One, it helps me realize that I need to set better boundaries. And two, it realizes, like, well, there is the reality of being a bit out on the edge with some of our ideas that we use. And traditionally, philosophers and people who push the edges of a culture are in for a hard time.
Here's what I would say to anyone listening. Like, if you're going along with the now utterly mainstream view of kind of postmodern social justice pluralism, you are not the lead edge. Like there's absolutely not. But what's difficult is people are looking forwards and it looks to them like they're looking back. When people are seeing something which and transcends. Actually, maybe for listeners, we'll just map out very briefly. So there's the sort of modernist worldview, which started to get challenged in the 60s, which was mostly about kind of facts. But only in recent years, there's a postmodern pluralist point of view, relativist point of view, which privileges the subjective over the objective. Interesting, back to your tennis, right? The traditional view of tennis was still sort of a bit in the past in a way now, like very objective, the body, facts, nutrition, and not taking this subjective and intersubjective into account. And now that is particularly in alternative circles and media as well, universities, this pluralist, postmodern, subjective, intersubjective worldview has now come into dominance, which Ken Wilber predicted. But what he didn't predict, and I chatted to him about this in Denver, was how nasty it would be. We were both just like, wow, when you wrote Brim Writers, man, we were not expecting it to get this vicious, And there's a frustration with being seen as primitive when actually you're more... There's a next stage of development which takes that into account. Says, you know what, sensitivity is important, and listening is important, and empathy is important, And, you know, taking into account that different people have different experiences that aren't all equal is important. And so are the facts.
Yeah. I do relish, like, it's been hard for sure, but right now I feel my gratitude for you and for me for being in this place at this time and the unique challenges that we have to face. And it's good to connect with you on it. It's nice to feel you as a brother in this.
I did notice when we talked about this at the Integral Conference, I won't go into all the content, but there's a lot of private conversations right now happening between leading edge practitioners, leaders of male and female, I would say, about this topic that can't happen in public because we're living under this kind of weird Stalinist regime. Someone had lunch with me today and I said, listen, if what you just said was recorded, that would be the end of your career. And he was saying some very factual things, nothing obscene or racist or nothing factually untrue, just stating some very factual things about a particular topic. And I said, that would be the end of your career. So it's kind of gone underground into these private conversations now and lead edge groups where my mentoring group over the weekend, very free conversation about these things. But it's weird, I feel like, the Soviets are running things and we're just kind of creeping around, chatting to each other now, waiting for the next revolution to happen, and it feels good, doesn't it? It feels good to have those conversations. And I'm also aware that I'm, treading a little more carefully because I know this is recorded.
Yeah, And I like the challenge of the whole complexity, like having to readdress all my mental models around this and engage every conversation in a way where I could really learn something new and change my thinking.
Off air, John said, kill all the ginger people. Him and his non-ginger privilege. Okay, so I'm enjoying this, but I feel like we've gone on a slight sort of peer-to-peer rant. I should get back to interviewing you a little bit. Let's at least talk about circling then. So the realizing the importance of the subjective and the intersubjective, and then it's like, well, shit, we need a practice for that. It's not just enough to notice that relating and emotions and connection matters. We actually need some practice for that. So we're going to get Guy on as well at some point, but what is circling for those that have never heard about it?
A simple understanding of circling is it's an interpersonal meditation. And there's a lot of principles and practices to support that process, to really bring a Vipassana-like meditative quality of like body awareness, but to extend that into connection with someone else. So the connection itself becomes part of the meditation, or what we're bringing consciousness to. And to bring it down to earth a bit, the first time me and Sean, who's the other co-founder of Circling Europe, the first time we tried it about 10 years ago, we followed one of the practices and we had to look each other in the eye and only speak when something deeply meaningful came to be said from the moment. And this was, two English guys not really used to looking each other in the eye, and
right.
10 minutes of awkwardness and giggles and that kind of thing. And then the next thing was like feeling like we're on drugs. Like, what the fuck is going on now? Like shifting in state experiences and powerful. And then I started to ask Sean some questions, and it took him into a very, very deep place. It was actually the first time he touched a part of himself where he realized he had faced abuse as a child, basically, where he'd been abused. And we were already into therapy and coaching and meditation and all things development. And it was like, wow, we can do this thing where we're meditating, we're learning about ourselves faster than we do when we have coaching. We're having these crazy state experiences. We're developing our connection, like it's intimate, and it's like developing our friendship. And it's like all of that being done together. It was like a kind of cross training that's ticking off all these cool things that we're into.
And actually, for me, it was also filling a missing piece in the kind of, if we look at an integral training model, right? There's physical training, maybe there's meditation for your mind, but then it's like, how did you work interpersonally? And often in, say, Buddhism, it's just like, well, that's ethics, or that's the community, the Sangha. But that happens pretty randomly.
Right.
Whereas this is an actual sit-down practice. So you're becoming aware of relationship, and even it doesn't have to be a big deal. It doesn't have to be like eye gazing, but it can just be like, oh, I'm noticing, I'm enjoying this in the conversation. I'm observing this in you. I'm guessing you're having this interior state, this emotion. Is that what you mean? So people might be confused what you mean by a sort of interpersonal meditation.
Yeah. What you're saying is good. And another kind of guide is sharing your assumptions of what's happening for the other person in the moment, but then really leaving space to hear how well that fits for them. Like, maybe your intuition's amazing, maybe you're projecting, and you can be free in that, but then really leave space for them to fill in what's there for them then and there. And the practice of it not needing to be different. Like, there's nowhere to get other than more here. Like a celebration of what's present and having a shared reality over what's here and now.
So it's about connection. It's about relating. It's not we're trying to get somewhere or judge each other or analyze each other, right?
Yeah, and those things can come up, and it's like that's included as well. But the base philosophy is can we make space for what's here and be in celebration of that?
And the key thing there is it's live. So there's a sort of authentic, and I always say anyone that used thinking you're authentic is like great sex. If you think you're having it, you're not. Like there's a way in which though that being in the moment is a big part of it. So I'm not just kind of dreaming of something else or planning the next thing I'm going to say to you, or saying the thing I always say on interviews. There's a liveness to it. Is that right? In terms of the sort of key aspect.
Absolutely. It's kind of like we put a magnifying glass on what's here and now. And when we do that, more gets revealed of what's here and now. And then we when it works well, we get in touch with this aliveness and this, not knowing what's going to happen next, and this excitement and this sense of togetherness.
It strikes there's a lot in common with improv in that kind of listening and aliveness and spontaneity. And, I do notice as well as intimacy and humor are two things that seem to come up quite a lot when people are in that mode, as it were. Yeah,
definitely. There's a lot of that. And then the other phrase I like is is transformational intimacy. There's something about, so that we're focusing on connection and trying to deepen what's present between us or understand what our shared reality is. And naturally through that process, we were finding transformations were happening because the subject was becoming object. What was this subtle background anxiety that had always been there, which was now had a loving attention on it, could be seen, and there was something in the being seen of that would then have things release, and transformation would happen in this really organic way rather than a more traditional goal-oriented approach that would be traditional in coaching or therapy.
So the transformation, the change is coming out of just being present to what is, rather than being like, right, I'm trying to work on this, I'm trying to achieve that.
Exactly. And of course, those desires to change will come up, and then we explore that. Like, what is that desire to change? What is it exactly that you're wanting to change, and how is that for you?
Now, I've recently got interested in circling again. Because I kind of going, okay, as someone that's done a lot of intrapersonal work, it's like the interpersonal side's getting interesting, and seeing problems in my own life and going, okay, so this is really about connection. And the other thing is I've seen more mature practitioners of this. So there's a phase that a lot of practitioners of people who are doing like NVC, I've also found, nonviolent communication, or any kind of interpersonal practice, where they get sort of annoying. Like I remember this one time we were in your car or something, and you're like, I just want to connect. I'm like, shut up, John, fucking shut up. Do you know what I mean? Like, I was like, I'm not in the fucking mood, I don't want to connect. And then like they come out the other side of it, and I was hanging out with our Marissa, our mutual friend, Marissa in Berlin about a week ago, and I just really like being around someone that can connect and doesn't speak shit and listens and is genuinely interested in how I am and expresses how she actually is, rather than, on the podcast, 50% of the guests just fucking do marketing spiel. I fucking hate it. and the other 50% are genuinely present to the interview. And it's totally different experience, you know, hanging out with Marissa or interviewing those guests. And it's just so much better. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's nice to hear. And it's also a little bit humbling knowing where I've smuggled my needs and things into the circling practice, and, you know, and loving the circling practice, but knowing, like anything, there's still an imperfect human doing it behind that and fumbling their way through.
You seem joyfully embarrassed. Is that is that sort of emotional state you're in?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah.
So for people, I'm imagining a listener out there going, I still don't get it. What does it actually fucking look like? And I had this for a long time. I'm like, what do you actually do? Like, what does it look like? Someone turns up to John Sean's or Marissa's circling workshop, you know, in Amsterdam. What does it look like for let's say it's a day-long workshop?
Mm. There's a way that as leaders, we've developed an element of circling called surrendered leadership. So for us, there's a quality of surrender every time we lead, which means that there's an unknown element to how the workshop is going to be each time. And that's actually something that people can feel normally pretty soon. It's like this leader's operating in a different way to the norm, and they're kind of weaving what's here in the present moment, like encouraging the group from like minute one to like be part of this collective experience and bring themselves forward, while at the same time setting the context of circling, which does involve introducing principles and various practices. There's pair practices, there's triad practices, there's circle practices, there's big group practices. But there is a surrendered dialectical quality to it that we as leaders are in this paradoxical position of being in the practice ourselves and setting the context for it.
And it's not all planned out, right? There's some sense of responsiveness and feeling into it. And
right. So we will plan things out, but we'll be like alive in the moment with everything. And like working, like practicing, so looking what's in the space. And like when I connect to what's here in the space, do I want to do what I just planned?
Yeah.
And what's alive in the space? So aliveness is something that we'll be working with.
And I'd say this is a sort of a sign that any trainer, whether they be a yoga teacher or, you know, coach or whatever, you know, doing a training at the weekend, is, you know what, I was going to break for lunch in half an hour, but let's break now. How does that sound? And everyone goes, yeah. And it's like, okay, that feels like a good call. It's just feeling like the rhythm was slightly different than the one written in front of me on a schedule or whatever. And, you know, that's the sort of, you know, it's jazz, baby. Like that's like the master skill of anyone in any embodied pursuit, I would say. That's not... Circling is just really focusing on that, right?
Absolutely. That is a sign of, I would say, mastery of anyone leading anything. And there is quite a distinct flavor that people seem to get of like immediacy from the beginning. It's like the lights go on of here and now. And there's also this sense of, the surrendered leadership. It's like, the leader isn't just, I've come in with all these assumptions about what the leader's doing, and when he doesn't do it, what does that mean for me? And what's the mirror? Like, I think that's one of the highest levels of the practice, but not just the practice of life, is like seeing the mirror in reality and seeing the potential to take a responsibility in the moment and like show up fully every moment and embrace other people's realities from each moment to the next as well. And that's what we're teaching, but it's also what we're trying to embody and do.
Sure, right? If you're not doing it as a facilitator, then it's you're teaching through example more than anything. And okay, you're still being a vague bastard though. So like in the actual workshop, there's this thing called circling as like a verb, you know, like I circled the shit out of him. Like what is it to be circled? That's where you're like sitting. I should say, listeners, not to be confused with the embodiment circle, which is a whole different thing that just has to have a similar name because you can't copyright a shape. But so what is it? What is the sort of process of being circled? Like, I'm sitting there, I'm in Amsterdam, I'm surrounded by all of you lot. What happens?
Right. Well, the birthday circle, which is the main way you can be circled, is where one person has the attention of the group, say 6 or 8 people, and someone will be leading it, and we just explore what it's like for that person to have the attention of the group. So as the leader, the first question might be, what's your experience right now? And the person might share, oh, I feel I need to do something, and then we're with that, and everyone in the group also shares their in the moment experience. So it can be really powerful feedback. If 5 people in the group are saying, oh, I felt fear when you said that, it's not like a discussion. It's people are sharing their like base level experience, so you can feel the truth of it. And when people see these things and there's a space for them to like take it in, and then like, what's happening now? What's it like to have these people scared of you? It can just go very deep very quickly and show up kind of things that have been in the background and that have never really been touched in therapy even, and it can just bring them to the foreground, and people can feel very seen and more themselves, ironically.
So one thing, this may just be my fear, but one thing that kept me away was not so much you or Marissa, who I like and trust, but the idea of like just being projected on by a group of hippies all day. Like the idea of like what's to say, because I've had some pretty unpleasant experiences where a certain behaviors are misinterpreted, just my manner is sort of projected upon in a certain way. I go, oh, really, do I want to subject myself to that? Like, what's to stop people just being like, oh, the whole group being like, well, your problem, John, is this, Right. That's not my idea of a good time.
No, absolutely. And that's where probably the most important principle is this idea of owning your experience. And if I'm leading a circle, I'm going to be encouraging and guiding all the people in that circle to get to what is their unarguable experience.
Uh-huh.
So it might start out of, Mark, you really need to do this thing. It's not okay. And more, that's up for discussion. That's not an owned experience. That's an assessment of reality. To get them more owned, it's like, oh, what's happening in you? It's like, oh, I'm feeling irritation. And okay, right. So you're feeling irritation. And how's that for you, Mark? This person's feeling irritation. And then it might be, what's under your irritation? Is there anything else around your irritation? Oh, it's jealousy, or I feel a need to get my opinions across. And often when people realize that, they realize the violence in it, or how this isn't very pleasant for you.
Yeah, and this idea of like what is subjective and what is not, I think is kind of critical, because as we move into this postmodern sort of pluralist domain, I'll hear people say subjective things as if they were objective or unchallengeable. Like they'll say, the problem is, John, you're just an abusive leader. And you'll say, whoa, there's an opinion there. What are the facts that's based on? What are your feelings? Are you feeling scared? What's going on? But when it's just said as like ineffable fact, someone said, you're really aggressive. And I said, well, what is it I did? And they said, you sent too many voice messages. And I said, oh, okay, so that's a different thing that you've interpreted in a certain way. And I like voice messages because I found them less aggressive. I thought that would lead to less conflict, but they interpreted it in a certain way. And like this idea of interpretation not being owned seems to be at the heart of a lot of the stuff that's going on around gender, male-female dynamics, were teachers abusing or not. Like this seems to be right at the heart of things.
Agreed. And where there is of course, human circling doesn't solve human problems, and we still have big conflicts and challenges. But the beauty that I come back to is when people do strip back, like to what is their unarguable, in the moment truth. And then they open and see the other person in where they are. And there's a sense of, oh, in connection, we can actually transform and change what we're feeling. Just because I was angry and on my high horse earlier, like when I'm actually with you now, my heart's starting to open because I can see your hurt and I can see like I had a wrong assessment of you. And that's something that I've got to witness so many times and support that process of like the armor coming off and just coming back to two vulnerable human beings who were doing their best and kind of messed up a bit.
I mean, is there sometimes kind of arguments at the circling session or accusations, or does it kind of go that road, or is it mostly sort of gooey loveliness?
I would say like healthy conflict. That's something we really believe in, to like meet in tension, meet in polarity, but less like over a discussion about something and more in the energy of the moment. So there is an intensity that can show up, but that very quickly leads to a deeper intimacy that then is pretty lovey. Normally by the end, it's like hugely lovey-dovey, but it's not, that isn't the focus. The focus is like what's here and now, and can we make conscious and connect what's here in the group? And at best, we get like a group intelligence working where it's like everyone has a unique instrument to play in the orchestra, and together we create something that we couldn't have planned beforehand, and it's magic.
There's a magic quality when that connection's really there, isn't it? And in my experience, this is quite difficult to connect if people are just talking about things, right? Without at least implicitly. I don't think it always has to be the very Californian, very serious, named relating. You know, I notice you're feeling this and I'm feeling this. You know, it can just be like just being aware, like, oh, I've got a certain feeling in me right now when I'm talking with you, John. You know, but without that, I find intimacy quite difficult. If it's just talking about something, criticizing, you know, it's really easy to badmouth a certain politician, or to geek out is nice sometimes, but it doesn't always lead to the same connection as at least being aware of that interpersonal layer.
Right. How's it now? How does that layer feel now with me?
Pleasant, relaxed. It's always weird on the podcast because I'm always aware of there's like a layer between me and you, and then there's also like about a couple of thousand people listening.
Right.
And I'm like, I sort of have some sense of them, but not that much, you know, and they're out there somewhere. So I can experience that almost in my body as an audience somehow. And, you know, I do want to serve that audience as well. I don't want to just ignore that audience. You know, sometimes we have a speaker and like, I'm leaning them towards something helpful for the audience. So, yeah, that's the sort of weird wee space, I think, of podcasting.
How's it going on? Like, what's your kind of radar on serving the listeners?
I feel pretty relaxed around it, which is normally a good sign. You know, it's sometimes I'm on the podcast like, this isn't going to help people, or I get bored or frustrated, and that's normally a sign I think the listener would be bored or frustrated as well. So I'm kind of tuning into my own emotional response sometimes. And there's been times when I've misread that as well as a podcaster, and I've listened back to an episode and gone, didn't really like how I came across there, you know. So there's this caution as well that's in the air, I think generally, but for myself particularly in the last a few months. And I'm like, okay, I'm in a question of like, how much do I want to drop that? Because it's you and I feel relaxed with you and we've got lots in common. It's a sort of safe, inverted commas kind of vibe. And then also aware of the realities of the world for recorded conversations.
Got it. I'm appreciating being on the podcast and how you've held it, and my radar for the listeners got a bit of a tick on it. I'm fairly happy.
Circling life, bitches. That's how it works. You know, it's interesting that like two British guys can have these like fairly tuned in emotional conversations. Do you know what I mean? It's like
a long way.
My group at the weekend was doing this, and it was like coming in and out of kind of vulnerability, and then going to humor, then going to practical marketing conversations. I was really quite impressed with them that's just a sort of fairly normal skill for that the community of sort of EFC practitioners anyway. And I think the body piece is really helping. I mean, maybe we should relate a little bit this back to the body before we close.
Sure.
Like in terms, you know, because it could seem like a verbal thing. We're talking about something. Like what's the body piece in this circling for you?
Well, as we get deeper into intimacy, I think the body shows up more. Like deeper feelings that show up in the body become more present. That's one big piece. I think connection facilitates embodiment, and it opens up parts of our energetic being. And
what
I was maybe going to say something else as well. There's another piece of using the body for connection. Like a lot of what I've realized as I've grown is like I actually connect most through my body, through touch and through silence and through movement and through posture. Or so that's what I was interested to connect you on, about this interplay between connection and embodiment. It fascinates me. I don't have that many answers. I just see them as mutually kind of dancing together.
And that's where the connection is, right? Like if we're talking without being aware of embodiment, for me, there's a disconnection immediately.
Absolutely.
And for all those people who like to talk after sex there, can I just say, shh, stop it, shh. So,
And there's something in circling where the principle is being with the other in their world. So I've become like, yeah, maybe someone's not in their body. What's that like? Like, can I get intimate with their experience? And actually sensing mind, like, wow, someone's in their mind, and actually having this sense of an energetic mind coming out. Like, wow, what's that like for them? Do they realize that? Do they feel that? What's that about?
And that's very integral to not make kind of mind bad, right? Because that's the sort of post-modern pluralist move, is like body good, mind bad.
Exactly. And it's more the body-mind. It's that a deeper understanding, I think, of embodiment is the body-mind, and that it's top-down and bottom-up, and that there's all kinds of stuff to explore and learn about. I mean, I imagine for you, it's just constant deepening into what the body mind is and what embodiment is. Is that true?
I mean, for me, part of the opening up of the mystery of embodiment is part of it's my life, but it's also a big part of this podcast. And actually, I felt the urge to speak to listeners for a moment. I had some criticism, people saying I speak too much, and that's because you know I'm Irish and I like to speak a lot, and you know I've got a big ego, blah blah blah. In some of the criticism, I'm sure is valid, but it's also because I want to have real conversations on this podcast. And the real conversation isn't just me asking questions and shutting up. Some of the interviews, that really feels like what I need to do. And others like this, I'm with someone who's a professional listener, is maybe a little bit more receptive than I am typologically, is my mate. So it's also like, it's much more natural to chat. And I just want to say, listeners, there are going to be episodes where it's almost 50-50. And that's deliberate. That's not just me talking over guests and being a twat. Sometimes it is, but it's often not. It's often like, I just want to have a real conversation on these podcasts, because that's what's satisfying to me, and I hope to other people too. So I'm sort of speaking to the listeners a little bit there, because I had a few people say you talk too much. And I was like, well, maybe I do, but there's also based around a lot of the things you've said around connection and realness. There's a reason for that.
I'm feeling some care for you, actually. It's like I want to put some towels on you and like imagine you've taken some hits and like just want to be in your corner and give you some love.
Oh, thanks, man. I feel warm and gooey hearing that. I'm a bit amused. It's nice. It's been the case, I think, for both of us, hasn't it? A bit of like, been quite a few hits.
Yeah.
And, you know, my therapist recently said, you know what, you've had a lot of criticism lately. You've had a lot of, and I haven't suddenly become kind of evil Genghis Khan or something. So, but there's just been a lot of hits lately, I think, for both of us. And yeah, without making any excuses, there's times when we might not have been impeccable. You know, that's not. Yeah, maybe it's not incongruent to have empathy for leaders that have been not always impeccable. You know, there's not like by the way, if listeners are waiting for like a big scandal, I don't think there is one out there, but you know, maybe there is. And it's almost like, well, I almost want to preempt it, John. Do you know what I mean? Like sooner or later, I'm going to say something I shouldn't. I'm going to fuck up. An ex-girlfriend from 10 years ago is going to get on the internet. Something will happen now. And, I haven't got any kind of thing that could be a criminal case in my history. But there's things in the past or things in the future where I just fuck up. And I wonder, where is that like allowing people to be human, even if they have power and authority? That's kind of where we started here today, wasn't it? I think that's been hot for both of us. And I like to keep these interviews, for want of a better word, actually real. Like, that's the thing we'd be talking about if we were just sitting in the pub in Brighton right now, right?
Right. And I see the aliveness of it right now in you as you talk about it. It seems like it's like a deep inquiry happening. That
I feel like you're interviewing me a little bit now, John. I'm a bit worried that guests are going to be, you're like, what the fuck's going on here? I could do that, I could do the other role. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's super live inquiry for me right now. And I think not just for me personally, this is why I don't feel like I'm wasting listeners' time with this. I feel like this is a social global inquiry right now. And the lead edge of it is not how do we attack and persecute powerful men. The lead edge of it is something else now.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think I could weave it back to circling and surrendered leadership, but I think the magic at the heart of what I do, I don't know if it's similar for you, is like the peeling back of the layers and meeting in human vulnerability and in human magic as well, or spiritual magic. And that can be quite distant in a lot of everyday culture. And I'm grateful to have a lot of these kind of spaces where that layer of dialogue can be let go and we can meet in something more human, where a lot of those things fall away of roles and authority and power, and it's like we can actually see each other and feel the love between us.
Boom. I think that's a lovely place to leave this. That feels like a nice wrap up, John. So just on the practical front, it seems a little bit prosaic coming from that, but where do people now with deep in love and intimacy and connection, let's do the marketing piece. So where do people find out more about Circling Europe?
CirclingEurope.com should have everything.
And post Brexit, are you out of the circle?
I'm still allowed to live in Holland, and
we hope.
Business. So
sorry if I'm opening up a can of worms now.
No, it's okay.
So circlingeurope.com, yeah?
Yeah, everything's on there.
Well, John, I'm a bit sad because I'm on a bit of a tight schedule today, and I need to wrap up just to keep some other promises, but it feels like there's loads more here. So I hope we can continue it in person, if not on air.
Great. Love to.
Thanks for your time today, mate.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Some ways to get more, to give back, and to get more involved now. So the biggest request I have would be to share the podcast with your friends, people that you think would really enjoy it. Email it to them, put it on your social media, tell them about it, old school. Really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support us financially, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/embodiment podcast and give us $1 an episode. And I'd say they're well worth $1. So that's less than £1 if you're in UK-ish. So yeah, please go there. On the embodiedfacilitator.com website is where this is hosted. Most people I think listen to for iTunes. iTunes, we'd certainly appreciate a review. The way iTunes works means that a review means more people will find it. iTunes regards it as more important for searches. So even a couple of sentences review really does help as a little thank you to us. And if you want to go to embodiedfacilitator.com, you can see the actual, links to the sites. There's comments on there. The Facebook group tends to be where people discuss things. So if you go to put in the Embodiment podcast into Facebook, there's a page which is relatively quiet and a group which does have some discussion on. So I will reply to things personally there. So also on embodiedfacilitator.com website, there's all sorts of freebies there. There's videos, there's free ebooks, there's ebooks you can buy. And of course, there's our newsletter list if you want to stay in touch and learn about things like the Embodied Facilitator course and our next Embodied Yoga Principles teacher training. Then go to that website and you'll see a little pop-up and you can get the newsletter through there. Okay, so I think they're the main ones. Tell your friends, pay us some money on Patreon, give us a review on iTunes, send us your email if you want to be on the newsletter list, and get involved on the Facebook. There, bit long. Pick whatever you like that works for you.
Till next time, welcome home to the body.